Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. After much beseeching from subscribers, I have finally relented, and will now be examining this battle. First, the usual disclaimers, and then we shall jump right in. Firstly, I shall not be examining or critiquing the great and incredible feats displayed by the main characters, nor their good luck, a thing which Jon Snow has in spades during this battle, because it is part of generic convention that the heroes in a fantasy or action story do extraordinary things which normal men cannot. Secondly, I started Game of Thrones but stopped watching after the first season, so my knowledge gaps have been politely and generously filled by Novaflask, whom I asked for counsel while making this video. Finally, if any of you are interested in why I make military analysis videos, you can view my 10,000 plus subscriber special video where I explain how competence makes audiences appreciate villains and heroes more in a story. Alright, let's begin. I shall go through some setup for this battle established in the previous episodes, then view the battle, and then give a final conclusion. Let's begin. So the battle is between Jon
She is my queen.
Snow and Ramsay the Lady Killer Bolton. Ramsay became the Lord of Winterfell and married Sansa the exceptionally soft-spoken.
What if I have a girl? What if I only have girls? Jane Paul's mother had 5 children, all of them girls.
Gosh, her voice level reminds me of some of my earlier videos. Anyhow, she fled from him and sought refuge with Jon at the Wall. Jon
She'll be a good queen.
Snow died and came back to life some episodes prior, because magic, well, divine intervention to be fair. Because he died, he is free from his Night's Watch oath and can move freely. Ramsay the Lady Killer Bolton, enraged that Jon
You are my queen.
Snow is sheltering his wife, kidnaps Jon's younger brother, Rickon Stark, a character I didn't even know existed until I started making this video. The new Lord of Winterfell then threatens the greatest of the Night's Watch with terrible destruction unless he gives Sansa back. Jon
You are my queen.
Snow is not impressed and decides to raise an army to fight Ramsay the Lady Killer Bolton. He calls upon the aid of a giant called Wun, the Onion Knight, the Free Folk, otherwise known as the Wildlings, and some other northern lords. Sansa the exceptionally soft-spoken suggests to Jon that they should ask the Knights of Vale, who are led by Peter the Walking Euphemism, aka Littlefinger, but Jon ignores this advice for 2 reasons. A, he doesn't trust Littlefinger, which is fair, something really bad happened to Boromir when he trusted him, and B, because he likely didn't hear Sansa's advice on account of her really quiet voice. At any rate, Sansa decides to go to Peter the Walking Euphemism and ask for the help of his forces. With an army that would be large for medieval times, but small in this modern age, Jon marches to Winterfell. He arranges his forces as thus. It is a strange arrangement. The horses are in front of the main body of infantry, and are in the centre rather than on the flanks. Considering that cavalry are best suited to countering flanking manoeuvres, this is a strange placement. The archers are right in front of the cavalry. Now, so long as Jon's forces have been well trained enough to allow the archers to fall back behind the line when and if the enemy starts charging, then the placement of the archers could work. What I don't get about Wun, who's with the infantry, is his lack of weapons. His people seem sophisticated enough to make clothes, so why isn't he carrying a giant-made weapon of some kind? Are we to believe the giants never made weapons for themselves, either out of steel or other materials? For instance, the Aztecs didn't have steel or iron weapons, but they made use of wood and obsidian, and created some rather nasty clubs. Assuming Wun had weapons, but they all broke before this battle, why didn't he find a small fallen tree, or uproot one for use as a club? Most silver birches would be the right size for him. In the course of this battle, we see him use his hands to kill soldiers, which, while effective, because of his great strength, does put his hands at risk of injury. Also as another point, Wun never uses his feet to kick his enemies. This doesn't make sense to me because not only is he wearing a pair of thick boots which would offer a measure of defense for his feet, and thus mean they would be less vulnerable than his hands, but also because being a giant human being, his legs have more reach than his arms. His enemies are all rather low down on the ground, meaning that kicking them would be easier than picking them up, and he could put some distance between him and them, making it harder for enemy soldiers to stab his body and internal organs with pikes or spears, for instance. I guess Wun is of limited intellect because he doesn't kick his enemies, and he doesn't even speak in this episode. I'm pretty sure the giants would have their own language, but I'm still surprised that Jon
She is our queen.
Snow didn't tell him to get a club. Really, I'm digressing at this point. The manner in which Jon
I don't want it.
Snow has arranged his forces is unorthodox, but not terrible like in the Long Night. At least they don't have their artillery on the front lines. I would talk about Ramsay the Lady Killer Bolton's troop formations, but they are exactly the same as Jon's, so the previous statements apply. The main differences are that Ramsay has no giants, but he does have more men. His army does appear to be the bigger of the two. Now, let us consider these fine, illegitimate sons who lead both armies. I don't know what Jon
You'll always be my queen.
Snow is wearing. It looks like leather armour or gambeson. Why isn't he wearing chain mail or plate mail, or just a simple breastplate? Well, strangely, there actually could be a good explanation here. Jon was part of the Night's Watch, and that was a very sorry military force. Per Season 1, the only people who joined the Night's Watch were criminals, paupers, desperate souls, and the marginalised. And no one in King's Landing took the threat of the White Walkers seriously. As far as they were concerned, the only dangerous thing beyond the wall were the wildlings. In fact, Jon was the only person who knew how to fight in this company, and had to train the men under him. If we factor all of this in, it is not too surprising that Jon and his men might not have access to any armour above leather or gambeson. Why would the people of Westeros waste money arming a force when it doesn't need to be properly armed? However, I don't understand why Ramsay the Lady Killer Bolton is wearing the precise same. I mean, why is he just wearing gambeson? He is the Lord of Winterfell. Could he not get himself plate mail, or even a breastplate? He is wearing less armour than his foot soldiers. They are at least wearing helmets, and some of them have shields. Here I have to argue against some prevailing film wisdom, namely that wisdom which claims if you put a helmet on a main character in film, the audience won't be able to recognise him. This is absurd. Firstly, let's consider these conquistador-styled helmets which all the extras in Ramsay's army are wearing. Not only are these helmets surprisingly historical, but they don't cover the face. An actor could easily wear one of these without being unrecognisable. Secondly, you can decorate helmets so that they are distinct and different from those of other actors. Consider 300, where Leonidas' helmet is the only one with a black plume of horsehair. Gerard Butler's face isn't visible for many of the shots when he wears this helmet, especially when he is with the extras. But this helmet decoration makes sure we all know it is King Leonidas, and it also helps to show us where we should be focusing our attention during the battle scenes. But your Imperial Majesty, I hear you cry, Ramsay is a coward. He doesn't charge into battle, and is happy to stay behind while the rest of his men engage in the melee. He has no reason to wear heavy armour, or any other type of armour for that matter. That may be true, but Ramsay is a lord, the Lord of Winterfell. Taking into account this fact, and Ramsay's character, I have the feeling that he would wear armour suitable for a man of his station to signify his higher status. What noble man would want to be indistinguishable from his peasant soldiers? This pointlet about distinction brings me to a larger point. Ramsay's men are holding spears attached with banners, bearing his coat of arms and that of his companies. Yet Ramsay and Jon are not wearing anything which distinguishes them from their fellow soldiers. They are not wearing surcoats or capes with their coat of arms, or any signifiers which would rank them as commanders. If Jon and Ramsay were to stand in between the ranks of their own soldiers, they would blend in, the same way one variety of mud does with other varieties of mud. This actually becomes a problem later, when Jon's men, in fright and panic, knock their leader to the ground and almost trample him to death. They likely wouldn't have done so if they could have recognised him from behind. Alright, enough of this. Let's get into the action. Ramsay the Lady Killer Bolton takes Rickon to the front of his line and releases him for a little game. Everyone smells a rat, but Rickon takes his chance because he doesn't have many other options. As Rickon starts running across the field, Ramsay starts loosing arrows at him. This is part of Ramsay's clever ploy to get Jon to run out into the middle of the field in an attempt to rescue his brother, and thus play with his nerves and cloud his logical judgments with emotion. Jon falls for this. He charges out into the field by himself to get to Rickon, isolating himself from his forces and thinking emotionally and instinctually, rather than tactically. The good thing about this plan on Ramsay's part is he doesn't need to actually hit Rickon for this to work. He does end up killing Rickon, but even if he hadn't, Jon would have still been isolated from his army, and that is a bad thing for a commander. Anyway, Ramsay the Lady Killer Bolton is apparently an excellent shot with his bow, and kills Rickon. Jon realises now that he's alone in the middle of the field, and Ramsay orders his archers to let loose. Jon, not having many options, decides to charge at the enemy line. The Onion Knight, realising that his leader is alone and will die, orders everyone except the archers to charge, so as to save Jon and make sure he doesn't die. With one very clever, dishonourable and devilish move, Ramsay has made his enemy charge into battle without a proper plan. Very clever and commendable. Unfortunately, Ramsay the Ladykiller Bolton throws away the many advantages given to him by his enemies. Ramsay's army is located on the slopes. Keep this in mind for the moment, we shall come to it momentarily. Ramsay orders a few volleys of arrows and hits Jon's horse, but not the rider. Jon
I don't want it.
Snow is now all alone. Now this is where Ramsay should have ordered another volley and finished him off. This would have been an excellent move. The opposing army would be dismayed and thoroughly demoralised to see their leader taken down by a volley of arrows. Yet Ramsay decides to do something highly unrecommendable given his position. He orders his cavalry to charge. Presumably, he isn't only ordering his horsemen to charge to kill Jon, but also to counter the enemy cavalry, who are not far behind Jon. However, this isn't a good move. Remember that Ramsay is on a hill, and Jon's cavalry are still far from his lines. It would make far more sense to keep loosing arrows until the last minute, then draw his archers behind the rows of spearmen. The slope of the hill would stop any of the remaining enemy cavalry from gaining momentum and speed, and the spears could keep them at a distance. Now, of course, there is the problem that Ramsay has stationed his horsemen in front of his spearmen, and just behind his archers, and he would have to move them elsewhere so the spearmen could do their work. This raises a question. If Ramsay's plan was to try and draw his enemy into making a premature charge, why didn't he have his cavalry on the flanks or behind his infantry in the reserve? As I've explained already, the best strategy, if this was indeed his plan, or even if it wasn't, would be to keep the archers firing until the last minute, and then make them retreat behind his ranks of spearmen. He could then send out his cavalry to either cut off Jon's horsemen, or use them to strike the flanks of the charging enemy infantry. I don't know why Ramsay has not arranged his forces so he can better execute his plan, and I cannot fathom why he thinks charging his own cavalry down the hill to stop a head-on charge is a good move, considering the fact that he has archers and spearmen who could do a better job. Jon
That's her decision. She is the queen.
Snow prepares to die in the most epic fashion seen in this series, but his cavalry arrive just in time and save him from becoming a legend. Now, I don't doubt that you can breed horses or otherwise spur horses on to charge into each other in this suicidal manner, but what I do question is the sanity of the riders on both sides. I would imagine that none of them want to be hurled off their horses and onto the ground, or on top of an enemy's head, so I would think that everyone would have slowed down so this didn't happen. I would expect all the mounted warriors to slow down drastically and engage in a typical melee while mounted. However, it is very possible that nobody was able to slow down in time, and it is also very possible that everyone expected the enemy's nerves to crack before theirs. At any rate, assuming that all the horsemen did charge at this speed and did not slow down, something like this would happen. As the chaos begins in earnest, the Onion Knight and Ramsay the Ladykiller Bolton decide to make things even more interesting. However, the Onion Knight regains his sanity at the last moment and tells his archers not to fire. Ramsay, on the other hand, I could explain how killing your own men while they are trying to kill your enemy is not only incompetent, but also completely mad. However, I thought it might be better to look beyond this battle and think of what happens after it, when and if Ramsay wins. Battles are not isolated phenomena, they always occur as a means to an end. In this case, Ramsay wants to get Sansa back, kill Jon and his supporters, and then establish his authority over Winterfell and the rest of the North. He has got to rule these lands and provinces when he wins. That will be difficult if the citizenry think he is an evil madman, who is willing to kill his own allies as well as his enemies. The other lords of the North would hear of this and wonder whether they could trust such a man. The peasants would never join his army voluntarily, they would have to be conscripted and press-ganged into it, and the desertion attempts would be high at any rate. Now, I'm not entirely sure whether Ramsay's horsemen are actually knights or mounted yeomanry. However, if any knights are in those formations of horsemen, then Ramsay is being even more of a fool. Needlessly killing lower-ranked aristocrats would be sure to go down very poorly with the lower gentry. The lower gentry who own land, presumably own trades and businesses, who have some authority over peasants, and who are trained warriors. Ramsay is making future governance needlessly difficult for himself. With this mad and foolhardy move, he would alienate himself from all ranks in his feudal society, making governance more difficult, insurrections more likely, and assassination attempts more frequent. Going back to the battle itself, in this moment, Ramsay's troops must be thinking to themselves, I'm in the wrong army. Am I going to be part of the next group who's going to be shot by the archers? This is a brilliant way to make your army either mutiny or refuse to obey your commands. Good job, Ramsay. After loosing many volleys of arrows into this mosh pit, Ramsay decides to stop for some reason. Maybe he has regained his sanity at this point. He then orders his infantry to charge as his cavalry force has been depleted, thanks to his decision to loose arrows at them. Jon's infantry and his giant have just reached the actual action on the battlefield. The Onion Knight as well has decided to charge in with the archers as they aren't doing anything and could provide extra aid. The battlefield currently looks like this. Most of the soldiers are in front of this small mountain of carcasses, although the ground elsewhere is also littered. Ramsay's spearmen and shield infantry create a half circle around Jon's forces and pin them against the mountain of bodies behind them. As well, some of Ramsay's regular infantry climb the mountain of corpses and cut off the escape from that direction. These are all good tactics. The only reason is why Jon and his men just stand there and let it all happen. Honestly, why didn't they move? Why didn't they try to stop Ramsay's men from doing this? Jon, you are the commander. Give orders for goodness sake. Anyway, the tactics Ramsay's infantry employ are sound enough. Try to push the enemy together in a large clump, and shove your spears into the mass of bodies. They are well organised and drilled, it would seem. Ranks of shieldmen and spearmen are neatly organised. Even if you take down one row of shieldmen, another rank will replace them, as our heroes soon discover. Now, this is where the giant should have had a club or a tree, so that he could smash a hole in the ranks for Jon's men to charge through. He could decimate ranks with ease, and he wouldn't even need to get that close. This is also where he should have tried kicking the enemy troops, because whenever he approaches the enemy line, the spearmen try to stab him in the upper body, rather than the legs, meaning he has ample opportunity to kick them like a football. They wouldn't even see it coming, because the shieldmen's shields do not provide a great deal of visibility, either for them or the spearmen behind them. However, the giant just uses his vulnerable hands, and doesn't do nearly as much damage as he could. Anyway, there is no concentrated or concerted effort to break through the ranks of the spearmen and shieldmen, so Jon's men panic, and try to get out by climbing over the mountain of dead bodies, but Ramsay's men are already there, and so they don't make headway here either. This is where Jon Snow gets knocked to the ground and is almost trampled to death. All seems lost, as the noose tightens around Jon's army, and victory is in Ramsay the Ladykiller Bolton's grasp. Then the Knights of Vale arrive, and Ramsay's infantry don't know how to respond, and soon find that they are the surrounded ones. The tide has turned. I don't know why Ramsay didn't have scouts around the battlefield to make sure that Jon didn't have any forces manoeuvring for surprise attacks. And I'm not sure how nobody in the castle of Winterfell saw the approaching Knights of Vale. Surely someone was on watch, and surely the people in the castle have means of communicating with their commander. Due to these recent arrivals, Ramsay the Ladykiller Bolton retreats to Winterfell Castle to rest and figure out a way to get out of the mess he's in. But he doesn't have long to think, because Wun starts smashing the gate down. This will be the first time Wun breaks the gates of Winterfell in this show. Now, I don't understand why he is using his hands. I don't doubt the strength of his knuckles, but why didn't Jon Snow order for a tree to be cut down and used as a battering ram? In fact, why did he, this barbarian, and Wun run towards the castle alone and without assembling their forces? Do 3 men seriously think they can storm a garrison castle? Also, again, I don't understand why Wun isn't trying to kick the gates down. Ouch! That's why you either use a battering ram or your legs. Anyway, Wun does break the gates down and charges in. Every archer lets loose at him, and he soon starts to resemble a pincushion. Jon and his archers then charge in, and everyone starts loosing arrows at each other. Shields and melee tactics now forgotten. Jon's archers defeat Ramsay's archers because they were all distracted by the giant. Now, Jon Snow is standing here like a lemon, not focusing on the battle, but instead looking at Wun in concern. At this moment, Ramsay the Ladykiller Bolton has a clear shot, but rather than shoot the enemy commander, he chooses to kill the giant, who wasn't moving and looks to be out of the battle anyway. Alright, so there's not much more to look at in this episode, but what do I think of this battle? I think it is well done. I say this because I do not make these videos out of some conviction that villains and heroes must never be guilty of making military mistakes. I make these videos to point out that audience members can and will notice such mistakes, and that battles need to be well written for the audience to feel tension, and so as not to break the suspension of disbelief. Mistakes are made during this battle. the most notable being those made by Ramsay Bolton. Nevertheless, he is still a threatening villain, because although he does some incompetent things, such as sending in the cavalry, not shooting Jon Snow on at least 2 occasions, he also does competent things, such as surrounding his enemy with the infantry, and luring Jon to attack him prematurely. The last point here is the most important, because the battle starts with the villain on top, and it is a great first impression. The impression we get of our villain, Ramsay, is that of a man who is clever and dangerous. First impressions are actually very important for villains in stories containing military conflict. This is why A New Hope starts with stormtroopers massacring rebels. The audience needs to know that the villains are a threat, and they need to know it quickly. If we compare A New Hope to The Last Jedi, where the villains don't succeed in the first battle, and completely fail in all senses of the term, the problem is clearer. Because Ramsay is initially ahead of the game, the battle can still be tense, and the audience can still respect Ramsay as a villain, even when he makes some mistakes. Moreover, even though he does kill his own men, and this can be explained by him being a sick sadist, so it isn't as if it comes completely out of nowhere, he still almost defeats his opponents. If it weren't for the near miraculous appearance of the Knights of Vale, he would have won, and the audience knows this. Jon Snow as well can be respected as a hero in this battle. He doesn't do what he does out of stupidity in this battle. When he rushes to save Rickon, he doesn't do it because he thinks it is a good idea. He just isn't thinking. He had an instinctual desire to save his adoptive brother, and many people would do the same if a member of their family were in such a predicament. The audience can understand why Jon did this, and respect him for it. He does what he does in this scene out of love for his family. It is highly commendable, even if it is not the wisest move on the battlefield. We can also understand why things do not go in his favour during the battle, because he is presented as a man who is on the back foot, and is always so because Ramsay managed to lure him into making premature movements. So Jon's passivity is in many ways less of a statement on his ability as a leader, and more of a testament to Ramsay's devilish schemes. Ramsay is shown to be a threat, and for that reason there is actual tension in this battle. If we compare the Jon Snow in this battle to the Jon Snow in the Battle of the Long Night, we see something different. For the first few minutes of the Long Night, everything is going to plan. The forces of the living are arranged the way the leaders wanted, and they even make the first move without being lured or otherwise manipulated by the enemy. Thus, Jon Snow and Daenerys look like idiots. This was their plan all along. They weren't manipulated. They weren't forced to make the Dothraki charge, but they did it. And they did it for no good reason. Now, admittedly, in this battle, we know Jon won't die, because you don't bring characters back to life for them to die again. However, the same is not true for anyone else in this battle. So there is tension among the audience as people guess who will live and who will die. As well, unlike the Long Night, there are no fake-out deaths, so the tension is maintained. Overall, I think this is one of the better fantasy battles caught on film. Some decisions are bad in the episode, but a lot of them are good and make sense. As well, the commanders are punished for their mistakes, such as Jon and his forces for making a premature charge. There is tension, and the villain is a suitable threat who does not come across as harmless or stupid. This is definitely a good battle, which writers and filmmakers can learn from. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all have an excellent day. Before I end this video for good, I would like to thank NOFAP Productions for making this compilation of Jon Snow. I used the clips from this compilation in creating this video, and I have to admit it really is a funny video. I recommend everyone go and watch it in its entirety. Thank you, NoFap Productions. I hope you are having a wonderful day.